Hunting down terrorists, this will be the nature of war in the future. Not great battlefields, not great tanks rolling. Military power is completely secondary to national will and national morality. You know, the whole of the world would get behind the idea, in the end, that individual freedoms are important, that the social contract between an individual and his government is a two-way street. But they will not get behind actions like Nicaragua, where we're backing the wrong people often, where we're supporting dictators for the thought of economic stability so that our foreign and domestic corporations can do business. And finally, I would say that the residue of hatred this is creating in these foreign countries, where we're doing these things and we don't think there are any repercussions, those people should think about the World Trade Center bombing and things of this nature. Things will come home to roost, and they may be 20 years later, of cavalier actions that we're taking now out there. And who is directing these cavalier actions? People who have never, in command and control, have never seen a shot fired in anger in their life, except hearing a round fired near the White House where somebody's mugging a tourist outside. We can't even straighten up our capital in terms of crime. We think we can go out there and be the world's top cop. It's impossible.
Cyril Richard Rescorla, or as he was known to most everyone he met, Rick Rescorla, knew all about danger. He lived with it almost daily, almost throughout his life. Rescorla was born in Hale, Cornwall on May 27, 1939. He grew up there with his grandparents and his mother, who worked as a housekeeper and companion to the elderly. In 1943, Hale served as headquarters for the 175th Infantry Regiment of the U.S. 29th Infantry Division, largely composed of U.S. soldiers from Maryland and Virginia, preparing for the D-Day invasion of Normandy. Young Rescorla idolized the U.S. soldiers and wanted to become a soldier because of them. He was a natural sportsman, setting a school record in the shot put, and was an avid boxer. When a professional boxing match was scheduled between a British boxer and a U.S. heavyweight contender, his friends backed to Britain. Rescorla backed the heavyweight from the U.S. In 1956, at age 16, Rescorla left Hale to join the army. At the time, Britain practiced conscription known as national service, which required every young man to serve at least for 2 years in the armed forces. Rescorla, however, chose instead to volunteer. This required him to serve 3 years, as the conditions for volunteers were considered to be better than those of conscripted soldiers. He enlisted in the British Army in 1957, training as a paratrooper with the Parachute Regiment, and then serving with an intelligence unit in Cyprus during the Cypriot insurgency from 1957 to 1960. In 1961, he would go on and enlist as a policeman with the Zambia Police Service. It was here he would meet one of his most important and influential figures in his life. His name was Daniel J. Hill. Hill confronted Rescorla about entering the Vietnam War to defend the North Vietnamese from the communist bloc in the South, Laos, and Cambodia. Both men were known voyeurs of imminent life-threatening adventures, sheer risk takers. In 1963, Rescorla took the next step into the unknown, the United States, where Hill was born. He lived in the YMCA in Brooklyn and then enlisted with the United States Army at Fort Dix in Trenton, New Jersey. Upon graduating, Rescorla was assigned as a platoon leader in the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, Air Mobile. In 1965, he would service under the legendary Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. Together, they would find themselves in the battlefield of La Trang. This event would later become a film in 2002 called We Were Soldiers, which was an adaptation from the book co-written by Hal Moore, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. The battle was known to have many incidents of abject violence and morbid carnage, which saw approximately 1,200 killed from the U.S. side, with 2,500 killed from the North Viet Cong in 4 days' time. When the morale was low, Rescorla was known to sing military cheers and even Cornish hymns to the men laying low. Stories of Rescorla's imminent bravery was known to anyone who was around him. In a New Yorker article written by James Stewart in 2002 about Rescorla and Bravo Company surveying the escape from La Trangue, quote, Rescorla and Bravo Company were evacuated by helicopter. The rest of the battalion marched to a nearby landing zone. On the way, they were ambushed, and Bravo Company was again called in for relief. Only 2 helicopters made it through enemy fire. As the one carrying Rescorla descended, the pilot was wounded, and he started to lift up. Rescorla and his men jumped the remaining 10 feet, bullets flying at them, and made it into the beleaguered camp. As Lieutenant Larry Gwynn later recalled the scene, I saw Rick Rescorla came swaggering into our lines with a smile on his face, an M79 on his shoulder, his M16 in one hand, saying, good, good, good. I hope they hit us with everything they got tonight. We'll wipe them up. His spirit was catching. The enemy must have thought an entire battalion was coming out to help them, because all of our screaming and yelling, end quote. When the war ended, Rescorla would receive numerous medals for bravery, which included the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with oak leaf cluster, a Purple Heart, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. Rescorla was also known as a very private and humble man, as he never displays these medals even at his home, hardly ever discussing the war on his time there with anyone. He would later change his number so that no one from his days of the military would contact him. Instead, he chose to focus on the future. He would later reside in Oklahoma and study creative writing. This did not motivate him enough, so he left and moved to New Jersey to take up a job working with Dean Witter in the World Trade Center in 1985. Dean Witter's offices occupied 25 floors in the South Tower and several floors in a building nearby. Rescorla's office was on the 44th floor of the South Tower. In 1990, Rick would end up calling his old friend Dan Hill, who had trained in counterterrorism. Rescorla wanted to strengthen the state of security, which was lacking in the World Trade Center in general. Hill knew Rescorla's mind, always thinking of the worst situations which could befall him, and then finalizing on how to neutralize the threat. Hill visited the basement levels of the North Tower, which had no visible security, and still saw a load-bearing column and stated that this would be where he would compromise the building if he were to commit an act of terrorism. I'd drive a truck full of explosives in here, walk out, and light it off. Rescorla went before the Port Authority, who owned the World Trade Center towers, and produced a detailed security draft report that he and Hill worked on, insisting on the need for more security in the parking garage. Their recommendations, which would have been expensive to implement, went ignored. On February 26, 1993, a rider truck parked next to the column in level B in the South Tower. The truck had exploded, injuring over 1,000 people while killing 6. In the 2 months preceding the attack, Rescorla once again called upon Hill to lend his expertise on how the towers could be compromised again. Hill gave an even more dire premonition. Dan Hill at this time converted to Islam and was known to even go to the evening prayers. His beard was grown full down to the neckline and began working as a consultant to Rescorla. He helped draft an analysis of the security measurements at the Trade Center. Hill also became increasingly aware of the local mosques frequented by radical imams like Omar Abdel Rahman in New Jersey and Brooklyn, which were becoming more adaptive to their technical prowess in regards to making bombs. Hill and Rescorla also theorized when the next attack would take place and what it would entail. Hill theorized that the radical groups involved would not use bombs this time. Instead, it would be hit from the top instead of the bottom. He implied planes with bombs in them could very well be the next likely option. This prompted Rescorla to go before a board meeting with Dean Witter and exclaim that they should move out of the World Trade Center and into a 3-story complex in New Jersey. He warned that Manhattan's limited bridge and tunnel connections meant that it could be easily cut off and transportation and communications disrupted. Witter's lease with the Port Authority at the World Trade Center didn't expire until 2006, and they wouldn't break it off from the lease based on Rescorla's highly respected assumptions. In 1997, Dean Witter would end up merging with Morgan Stanley. Rescorla would end up training the employees at Dean Witter Reynolds on the importance of fire drills and drills which would be front as a terrorist incident. His exercises would become a monthly event in which he trained the employees to meet in the hallway between stairwells and go down the stairs 2 by 2 to the 44th floor. These drills would later become known to some prolific managers at Dean Witter Morgan Reynolds, who resented the fact that these sometimes would interfere with meetings. However, it did not deter Rick from becoming adamant with these life-saving drills. He had dealt with bureaucrats in the U.S. military after all. His strict no-nonsense approach would be part of the drills, and when he would catch employees at Dean Witter Reynolds slagging off, he would reprimand them, even using a stopwatch to time the events. Rick would end up marrying a woman named Susan Green in 1999. He finally found his peace he was searching after all these years. Rescorla had married once previously, in the latter months of 1994, but had found out that he was afflicted with cancer. He would be seen visiting his local doctors with his wife at his side while he would receive treatments. By 98, the cancer had spread into his bone marrow. However, this did not stop Rick from living his life his way. While vacationing in New Mexico in 2000, he was contacted by managers from Dean Witter Reynolds. They were to let go 1,500 employees, and security personnel had to be there to escort them off the property. Rick resented the fact that he was to act in this manner, as he always had felt fired employees should be dealt with a high degree of dignity. Not to mention, he knew most of these people on the personal level, some whom he knew well for over 25 years. Many would end up weeping as Rescorla would help them out of the premises. This experience had left Rescorla shaken, as he was not equipped to deal with the more emphatic side of these people. The experience was so distraught, he talked with his wife Susan about retirement. Yet, as they looked over their financial situation, along with a decreasing 401k, he stayed on with Dean Witter Reynolds for just one more year. The year was 2001. Susan relayed the fact that they would have an extended vacation in Florence, Italy. Susan's daughter, Alexandra, was to be married there. The date, September 12th, 2001. 4:30 a.m., September 11th, 2001. Rick got up at his usually early hour. While showering, Susan laid out his clothes for him. His casual but professional attire was something of importance to Rick, as he insisted that his security staff wear suits and ties every day, believing that proper attire inducted respect and boosted morale, something he learned while he was in the military. He kissed his wife goodbye and left for work. At 8:45 a.m., Susan was on the phone with Alexandra when she got another call. The caller yelled, "Look at the television." As she did, the screen showed the North Tower with a large gaping hole with billowing, thick, acrid smoke bellowing out from it. Meanwhile, Dan Hill was at his home when he got a call from Rick Rescorla. "Are you watching TV?" he asked. "What do you think?" Hill replied, "Hard to tell. It could have been an accident, but I can't see a commercial airliner getting that far off." Rescorla responded, "I'm evacuating right now. Pack a bag up here. You could be my consultant again." While terrified people were told to go back to their desks in the South Tower, Rick Rescorla would advise the employees at Dean Witter Reynolds to leave the premises immediately. La Trang visited Rescorla that day, when his men were seen in a similar situation, low on morale and afraid to die. He would emphatically sing into his bullhorn as he was leading the employees out of the building. Minutes later, Rick called his wife Susan. She was beside herself. "Stop crying," he told her. "I have to get these people out safely. If something should happen to me, I want you to know I've never been happier. You made my life." Rescorla then went back up the stairs to the office of Dean Witter Reynolds to make sure no one was left behind and that everyone was fully and safely evacuated. Dan Hill had called Susan to amplify that Rick would have made it out safely. As he finished saying this, Susan screamed, "The South Tower is collapsing!" Hill had given Susan some small measure of hope that Rick had probably made it out. As he hung up, Hill knew that Rick was dead. He had summarized that he would not have left until everyone of the building was safely out. Philip Purcell, the chairman of Morgan Stanley, had called Susan and had notified her after days of search and rescue operations, he assumed there would be no more survivors. The clothes Susan had laid out for Susan's daughter's wedding was still on the bed. She still held out hope, even if the odds were stacked against her. However, one of Dean Witter employees, Bob Sloss, who was on the very last employees to be evacuated, had seen Rick on the 10th floor just 10 minutes before the South Tower collapsed. Sloss warned Rick to get out of the building. However, Rick replied to Sloss, "I will as soon as I make sure everyone else is out." Sloss saw Rick went back up the stairwell, heading up to the 44th floor. It was the last time anyone saw Rick alive. Rescorla was declared dead 3 weeks after the attacks. His remains were never found. Yet his bravery was just beginning to be known to the world. Old Welsh songs would be played in honor of his memory at his funeral, just like his songs which he played for his men during the Battle of Latrang, and the song that he played for the employees whom he helped evacuate from the South Tower. All 2,687 of them. The story of Rick Rescorla must live on.